Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So with Sony's recent announcements of the Xperia 1 Mark 8, there's been much discussion as to whether it's worth upgrading to the Mark 8 series from a previous Xperia, especially if you've been with Sony since the last couple of generations. As we all know, the only real upgrade, or I would say the biggest upgrade on the 1 Mark 8 is the updated telephoto sensor. And for those that are on the fence as to whether they should upgrade or not, I'm not going to go through whether the upgrade is worth it. That's all obviously a personal decision. But for those who decide that don't want to update, I want to give you a different option if you still feel that you want, let's say, a fresh coat of paint or some new functionality from your aging Xperia. So as you're probably aware, Sony, especially on the earlier Xperia generations, say Mark 4, Mark 5, Sony only offered about two OS upgrades and 2 years of security updates. So by this point, the Xperia 1 Mark 4 and the Mark 5 are done receiving updates officially from Sony. And that's where this video comes into play. So if you don't want to upgrade, but you still want updates or you want to experience the latest Android version, um, you might want to consider installing a custom ROM. And that's exactly what I've done here on my Xperia 1 Mark 4. I installed LineageOS and I wanted to go through the visual changes, maybe the different software settings that are provided to you via the custom ROM and that is not provided by Sony. And just to see if this might be an option for you if you want to maybe give your phone some new juice so it doesn't feel so old compared to what's happening currently in the Android world. Okay, so with LineageOS, it's a custom ROM that requires you to unlock the bootloader to allow you to load it onto the phone. Now, this obviously does have some drawbacks, which I can get to in a different video, but for now, I want to focus on the positives. Okay, so the versions of LineageOS I have installed in this device is 23.2, and just to show that. About phone. So you can see here it's Xperia 1 Mark 4 and it's the XQ C272 model, right? So the LineageOS version is 23.2, and the nice thing with LineageOS is that every week you get automatic over-the-air updates. So any bug fixes, any changes to the OS are provided weekly, and it's a very simple process to update the OS. Okay. Now, specifically with the OS, there are many visual changes that just make even the current Xperia 1 Mark 8 feel dated, and that's very much a big poo-poo on Sony for being so stingy with upgrading their version of Android, because even the version of Android that comes installed on the Xperia 1 Mark 8 uses an older build of Android 16. I believe it's the base build of Android 16 before the inclusion of Material 3 design in the QPR updates. So as you can already tell, the notification panel is probably the biggest change you'll see immediately. In traditional Sony ROM, the back panel itself is hard coded to a dark theme, so it's always black. So no matter what changes you might want to make via color blender or some other application to change the color of the icons, the back panel itself, what you see here as clear, is always a dark black, and that cannot be changed. And because that's been hard coded into the operating system. So up until Android 16, that was not modifiable on AOSP. You might have different manufacturers that put in the extra work to change that, but Sony did not. So even with the Mark 8, you're stuck with a black panel for the notification screen. In addition, if you put the phone into horizontal or landscape mode, you do get a split screen between the notification panel and then your quick settings, which is just visually more appealing in my opinion, right? In addition, when you go into the settings themselves, you can immediately see the new styling for Android 16 using Material 3, where different uh, where the settings are grouped together based on their functionality, right? So security, location is all in one. They're grouped together. Maybe you kind of see the separation here. Uh, the connection settings are grouped together, and so on and so forth, right? And even with the on the Xperia 1.4, LineageOS does allow you to use up to the 4K resolution of the panel, right? Which is a big uh, nice to have. Whether you can see the difference between 4K and 1080p, that's all depends on your eyes. Personally, I feel I can see a slight difference. It does feel more sharper, a little more contrasty, but it could be just a placebo effect because I want it to be 4K, right? Of course, since if you do use the 4K option, this does use more battery life, so it's really up to you whether you think that feature is worth it or not. It's just nice to have, and I wish Sony had included it on their official build for AOSP. Excuse me, for the Sony ROM, right? In addition, with the Android 16 version of LineageOS, you do get slightly more options to modify the display. So, for example, you have this option called Live Display, which is not available in Sony, which does automatic adjustments to color, saturation, intensity based on the time of day, right? So you can set your own values and adjust appropriately to whatever you feel is comfortable for you. What else? In addition, with the lock screen, you do get the option to have lock screen widgets, right? Which is not available on Sony because, again, even on the Sony Android 16, you don't get that, right? It's very much a bare bones Android 16. And again, it just makes the phone feel much more dated than it actually should be, especially compared to other competing devices, right? From Oppo, from Xiaomi, even from Samsung. So the OS itself is very fluid. Um, it's very responsive, and I would even say that the way that the OS renders the display, it even feels sharper than the Xperia 1 Mark 5, which I'm using to record this, which is just using the built-in Sony skin, and I feel that the Lineage OS drawing is much sharper. It just looks nicer, right? And if it weren't for the fact that Google Wallet, you can't use Google Wallet to pay for items by NFC, I would automatically upgrade my Mark 1.5 to Lineage OS. But because I use my phone to pay for things a lot just for the convenience, I haven't done this yet. Hey everyone, so I apologize for the change in location. I realized that during the last clip that there was a strange reverb slash echoing that was going on that might have affected the audio of the clip. And so if you noticed that, I'm very sorry about that, but I did change locations and just to hopefully get a better sound on this video. So I was saying, or I wanted to say before switching locations, was that when you install LineageOS, it does come completely clean of Google services by default, right? There is an option during the install of the ROM to allow for Google Play services to be installed as part of the package. If you don't do that, you will not have access to the standard Google apps such as Google Play Store, Google Services, Google Wallet, Messages, all of that. All those apps that you might be used to from regular Android do not come as standard with LineageOS. So if you care about that stuff, then make sure you follow the guide specifically to add the Google services. Being that LineageOS does install very clean with no real apps to speak of, that also means that you lose access by default to the Sony apps. So Video Pro, uh, Photo Pro, Cinema Pro if you're using 1 Mark 4, 1 Mark 5. However, the good thing is that you can actually load those apps after the fact. So you still have access to the standard Sony apps where you have Photo Pro, right? Um, you also have access to, I'll show you the Video Pro, right? And this works as expected without any actual problems. The one thing I will say is that in order to get those apps, you have to actually download the correct version for your model, right? So in this case, I'm using Xperia 1 Mark 4, right? So I had to download the version of the app that's specific to the 1 Mark 4. If I try to load a version that was installed on or that came with Xperia 1 Mark 5, that will not work. It's pretty simple to find as long as you know how to search correctly, but you can have those apps on your phone without any problem. The one thing there are two things that you will not have access to, and that's just because of the hardware limitation in terms of how Sony implements their version of Android. So two things that you would not get are SideSense and the Game Enhancer app. Those are tied to certain hardware IDs that are only provided by the Sony ROM. So if you install LineageOS, despite what the web may say about being able to enable those applications, it can be very hit or miss, and more than likely it will not work. So I wouldn't even bother trying to attempt it. So again, if you care about those apps, maybe LineageOS is not for you. But if you don't really use the SideSense or the Game Enhancer, then I would highly suggest using or moving to LineageOS. With LineageOS, you do get a version of stamina mode, or a battery saver, and you can see changes back to a dark theme. You can also set charging limits, just like regular Sony OS allows us to do. So yeah, it's a pretty, again, nice at the very least visual overhaul of the Sony operating system, and you get access to most of what you would expect from a Sony phone, especially when it comes to the camera apps. Okay, as I said before, or maybe you have access to also lock screen widgets, so it makes it really nice as well to just be able to quickly get a glance of your normal widgets that you have in the home screen, but without not having to unlock your phone. So let's see if I can show that. There it is. So if you swipe from the lock screen, and you have access to your widgets. Okay. All right. So that's it for this video. I think you guys were able to see how beautiful the LineageOS operating system is, especially compared to the Sony ROM. And I really do think that this is a great way to extend the life of your phone, right? Especially with today's economy and economic climate. Who's keen on spending close to $2,000 on any new phone, whether it's a Sony or the Oppo or the Xiaomi's of the world, right? So if you're interested in possibly doing this, I highly recommend it. You can go to LineageOS website and download the appropriate instructions and the ROM itself. I'll leave a link to the website in the description. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions, and see you in the next one.